From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
She leaves behind a husband, a wonderful man, who likewise spends his life campaigning for human rights and justice. And she leaves behind two young children who will never grow up to see their mum again.
Britain mourns the death of rising British MP Jo Cox, who was stabbed and shot to death in her own district. Eyewitnesses say her assassin, Thomas Mayer, shouted "Britain first," a slogan of the far-right anti-immigrant political party. Now the Southern Poverty Law Center reveals the assailant's a longtime supporter of the neo-Nazi National Alliance. This comes on the first anniversary of when self-declared white supremacist Dylann Roof murdered 9 people in the historic AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Then, Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders addresses supporters in a live webcast. He did not endorse Hillary Clinton, but vowed to work with her to defeat the presumptive Republican nominee, Donald Trump.
I look forward in the coming weeks to continued discussion between the two campaigns to make certain that your voices are heard and that the Democratic Party passes the most progressive platform in its history, and that Democrats actually fight for that agenda.
As thousands plan to attend a People's Summit in Chicago to discuss the next steps of what Sanders calls the revolution, we'll speak with a key participant, Roseanne DeMoro, head of the National Nurses United, the first national union to back Sanders last year. Sanders recently tried to place her on the Democratic Platform Committee, but said he was blocked by the DNC. Then a major break in the decade-long fight to unveil records from the NYPD's surveillance of political organizations in the 60s and 70s, including the Young Lords. The NYPD said the files were lost, but now says it's found more than 1 million pages. We'll speak to the history professor who sued to force New York to find those files. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Britain's in a state of mourning today after British Parliament member Jo Cox was shot and killed shortly after a meeting with her constituents Thursday. Jo Cox was a 41-year-old mother of 2 who worked at Oxfam before being elected as a Labour MP last year. She was known for her passionate support for Syrian refugees and was a member of the Labour Friends of Palestine. British Prime Minister David Cameron paid tribute to her on Thursday.
This is absolutely tragic and dreadful news, and my thoughts are with Jo's husband, Brendan, and the 2 children and their wider family. We've lost a great star. She was a MP, great campaigning MP with huge compassion, with a big heart, and people are going to be very, very sad at what has happened. Dreadful, dreadful news. It's right that we're suspending campaigning activity in this referendum, and everyone's thoughts will be with Jo's family and with her constituents at this terrible time. Jo
Cox is the first member of the British Parliament to be murdered in over 25 years. Her death came just a week before the major Brexit vote, when British voters will decide whether the country should stay in the European Union. Cox was a vocal advocate for Britain to stay in the EU. During the attack, eyewitnesses said her assassin, Thomas Mayer, shouted "Britain first," a possible reference to the far-right anti-immigrant political party of the same name, which is pushing for Britain to leave the EU. The Southern Poverty Law Center says Mayer is a longtime supporter of the neo-Nazi National Alliance. This comes as today marks the first anniversary of the attack by white supremacist Dylann Roof on the historic AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, that claimed 9 lives. We'll have more on the anniversary and Jo Cox's murder after headlines. President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden visited Orlando, Florida, Thursday, where they met with the families of the 49 victims of Sunday's shooting massacre at the LGBT nightclub. The meeting came one day after Senate Democrats mounted a nearly 15-hour filibuster to demand a vote on gun control. In Orlando, President Obama called for action on gun control.
Those who were killed and injured here were gunned down by a single killer with a powerful assault weapon. The motives of this killer may have been different than the mass shooters in Aurora or Newtown, but the instruments of death were so similar.
Meanwhile, in a New York Times op-ed published Thursday, General Stanley McChrystal, the former U.S. commander in Afghanistan, also called for increased gun control, writing, quote, "Our communities should not feel like war zones. Our leaders can start by doing more to keep guns out of the hands of those who cannot be trusted to handle them responsibly. That must be our mission," unquote. This comes one day after Massachusetts Representative and Marines veteran Seth Moulton appeared on the cover of the New York Daily News, holding an assault rifle underneath the headline, quote, "No civilian should own this gun." Meanwhile, Arizona Senator John McCain has blamed President Obama for Sunday's massacre in Orlando while speaking to reporters Thursday.
Hearing a lot from my constituents about what happened, and of course I'm making them realize that Barack Obama is directly responsible for it, because when he pulled everybody out of Iraq, Al-Qaeda went to Syria, became ISIS, and ISIS is what it is today, thanks to Barack Obama's failures, utter failures, by pulling everybody out of Iraq, thinking that conflict's in just because we leave. So the responsibility for it lies with President Barack Obama.
McCain later tried to walk back his comments, writing, quote, "I misspoke. I didn't mean to imply the president was personally responsible. I was referring to President Obama's national security decisions, not the president himself," unquote. But presumptive Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump stood by McCain's original comments, telling supporters in Dallas while Obama's blaming guns, Trump thinks the shooting was caused by, quote, "weakness on behalf of our leadership," unquote. CIA Director John Brennan's told the Senate Intelligence Committee Orlando shooter Omar Mateen had, quote, "no direct link," unquote, to the self-proclaimed Islamic State or any other extremist network, although Brennan said Mateen was inspired by ISIS. Meanwhile, Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson has asked Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg for data from multiple Facebook accounts allegedly associated with Mateen. In the letter, Senator Johnson claimed Mateen had posted on Facebook calls for the U.S. and Russia to stop bombing campaigns against ISIS. This comes as the family of California student Noemi Gonzalez, who was killed in the Paris attacks last November, sued Twitter, Google, and Facebook, arguing the social media networks have violated the U.S. Anti-Terrorism Act by providing material support to ISIS. The lawsuit argues, quote, "For years, defendants have knowingly permitted the terrorist group ISIS to use their social networks as a tool for spreading extremist propaganda, raising funds, and attracting new recruits," unquote. Meanwhile, in Mexico, new information is emerging about a shooting massacre at an LGBT nightclub in the southern state of Veracruz last month. On May 22nd, gunmen opened fire inside Madame, a popular gay bar in Jalapa. There are conflicting reports of the number of people killed, between 5 and 7. 14 were injured. Authorities also said the shooting was drug-related, but community members are calling it a hate crime. In news from the campaign trail, Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders addressed his supporters in a live webcast Thursday night, vowing the continuation of what he called his political revolution. The speech came 2 days after Hillary Clinton won the last primary in Washington, D.C. While Clinton has claimed victory in the Democratic race, Sanders announced he would stay in until the Democratic convention. He did not endorse the former Secretary of State, but vowed to work with her to defeat Donald Trump. He also said he plans to push the Clinton campaign and the Democratic Party to adopt a more progressive agenda. We'll have more on Sanders' campaign later in the broadcast. More than 50 State Department diplomats have called for U.S. military strikes against the regime of Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad, saying Assad has repeatedly violated Syria's tenuous ceasefire. In an internal State Department memo, the diplomats argue for a sharp departure from President Obama's policy in Syria, which includes targeting the self-proclaimed Islamic State, but not the Assad regime. In the memo itself, however, the diplomats acknowledge the risks to increase U.S. military intervention, including the possibility of military confrontations with Russia, which is backing Assad. President Obama and his top military commanders, meanwhile, have raised concerns about the power vacuum that would emerge if Assad is removed. The memo comes as airstrikes on rebel-held sections of Aleppo forced a hospital supported by Doctors Without Borders to shut down Thursday. Aleppo residents also reported barrel bombs being dropped. Meanwhile, a federal judge has ruled against Texas, allowing the federal government to resettle Syrian refugees there. A new Senate report says the Red Cross lied to Congress in the wake of the 2010 Haiti earthquake and used far more donated money on its own overhead costs than previously acknowledged. The Red Cross raised nearly $500 million in donations after the disaster. The 300-page report says the Red Cross used 25% of those donations, about $125 million, on its own fundraising, management, and program costs rather than on aid to Haiti. The report concludes there are, quote, substantial and fundamental concerns about the Red Cross as an organization, unquote. Last month was the hottest May on record. It was the 13th straight month to set a new record amidst increasing global warming. This comes as the central United States is slated to experience a sweltering heat wave over the weekend. Meanwhile, hundreds of people in Southern California have been evacuated from their homes near Santa Barbara as a drought-fueled wildfire exploded in size Thursday. Scientists have linked the increase in wildfires to climate change. In Texas, authorities are investigating the murder of journalist Jacinto Hernandez Torres, whose body was found Monday night in the Dallas suburb of Garland. Torres was a reporter for the Spanish-language newspaper La Estrella, a member of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. His daughter, Aline, says she believes her father may have been killed for his journalism, which involved investigations of human trafficking. And in Seattle, a public school teacher who was pepper sprayed by the police during a Black Lives Matter protest on Martin Luther King Day has reached a $100,000 settlement with the city. He's using the money to establish the Black Education Matters Scholarship for student activists. Jesse Hagapian is a history teacher at Garfield High School. He was pepper sprayed by Seattle police officer Sandra De La Fuente while talking on the phone with his mother after addressing the rally. He announced the settlement Monday.
I did reach a settlement with the city of Seattle for $100,000. But I want it to be clear that $100,000 is not justice.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Britain is in a state of mourning today for a rising star in the British Parliament who died Thursday after being stabbed and shot shortly following a meeting with her constituents. Jo Cox was a 41-year-old mother of two who worked at Oxfam before being elected as a Labour MP last year. She was known for her passionate support for Syrian refugees and was a member of Labour Friends of Palestine. Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn paid tribute to her on Thursday.
She leaves behind a husband, a wonderful man who likewise spends his life campaigning for human rights and justice. And she leaves behind two young children who will never grow up to see their mum again. They can be proud of what she was, they can be proud of what she did, and they can be very proud of everything that she stood for. We come together at a time like this. We come together to support the family and to mourn and to reflect that violence is not an answer. Violence is not an answer to anything.
Jo Cox is the first member of the British Parliament to be murdered in over 25 years. Her death came just a week before the major Brexit vote, when British voters will decide whether the country should stay in the European Union. Cox was a vocal advocate for Britain to stay in the EU. During the attack, eyewitnesses said her assassin, Thomas Mayer, shouted "Britain first," a possible reference to the far-right anti-immigrant political party of the same name, which is pushing for Britain to leave the EU.
Meanwhile, the Southern Poverty Law Center here in the United States has revealed that the attacker, Thomas Mayer, is a longtime supporter of the neo-Nazi National Alliance. Documents released by the center show Mayer has spent over $600 buying periodicals and other items from the group, including a manual that contained information on how to build a pistol. In addition, the Daily Telegraph is reporting Mayer subscribed to SA Patriot, a South African magazine published by White Rhino Club, a pro-apartheid group. We go now to Montgomery, Alabama, where we're joined by Richard Cohen, president of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Richard, welcome back to Democracy Now! Can you explain what you know about who Thomas Mayer is?
He was a longtime follower of the National Alliance. That was the largest neo-Nazi party in the United States, with significant ties to Europe. Between 1999 and 2003, he bought things about weapons, he bought things about explosives, and I think just as importantly, he subscribed to a variety of white supremacist literature.
And Richard Cohen, for those folks who are not familiar with the National Alliance, its founder, the author of the notorious or infamous cult classic of the far right, the Turner Diaries?
Yes. William Pierce, the head of the National Alliance, as you said, was a prolific writer. He wrote a book called The Turner Diaries that was the blueprint for the Oklahoma City bombing. It was also the blueprint for a lot of other terrorist activities. Pierce was a devoted follower of Hitler, and that's no exaggeration. He called Hitler the greatest man of the 20th century, and he talked in his manifesto about the need for white living space and how his followers couldn't be deterred by the momentary unpleasantness of their task. You know, a clear reference to genocide.
Can you talk about the link between, if there is one, between the National Alliance and the far-right group, anti-immigrant group in Britain that's opposed to that wants Britain to leave the European Union?
Sure. I think the fundamental thing for people to understand is that the white nationalist movement in this country, the neo-Nazi movement in this country, is something that is really a worldwide phenomenon. Pierce, the leader of the National Alliance, traveled to England often, had ties with, for example, Golden Dawn, the neo-Nazi party in Greece. Members of the British National Party were also a far-right nationalist party in England that's opposed to the European Union, frequently traveled to this country. Members of the British National Party were members of Pierce's organization. So this kind of white ethnic nationalism that we see in our country is also very much alive in Europe, and groups like the National Alliance exploited that.
Able to document the contributions and the subscriptions of someone like Mayer, including to, for instance, there have been reports of his subscribing to right-wing South African publications as well.
Well, it doesn't surprise me that he subscribed to material from South Africa. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but the Charleston shooter, you might remember, had patches from the apartheid regime in South Africa, patch from the old Rhodesian, white party. And so again, this white nationalism is not just a phenomenon here, it's really an international phenomenon.
Can you talk about the Britain First voicing support for the presumptive Republican presidential nominee here, Donald Trump's ban on Muslims entering the U.S.? According to the Huffington Post, Britain First told supporters to vote for Trump on Facebook. The group also applauded Trump's statements about London last year on MSNBC. Let's go to those comments.
We have places in London and other places that are so radicalized that the police are afraid for their own lives. We have to be very smart and very vigilant.
Richard Cohen, your response.
I mean, Trump reflects the white nationalist trend in this country, so it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that white nationalists in England and in other Western European countries see him as their savior or champion. One of the things that's unusual about this campaign, Amy, is usually the white supremacists in this country sit it out. Their attitude is a pox on both their homes. They see both parties as corrupt. This time, very famous white supremacists, David Duke, for example, see Trump as their champion. They've called him, for example, the glorious leader. So that's what we're seeing.
Today, Friday, June 17th, marks the first anniversary since the self-declared white supremacist Dylann Storm Roof claimed the lives of 9 black men and women who gathered for Bible study at the historic Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. He gunned them down. He later confessed to the attack, now faces the death penalty. Can you talk about this anniversary?
Yeah, I think the country has made some progress dealing with the symbols of hate. Confederate flags have come down, other monuments to the Confederacy have come down. Yet we've had a tougher time dealing with the substance of hate. There was a tremendous backlash, for example, to people taking down the Confederate flags. We've documented more than 300 pro-Confederate flag rallies last year. And those weren't only in the South. They were as far as, Washington State, Oregon, Pennsylvania. So, again, those are eruptions of, white pride, ethnic nationalism. We also saw last year an uptick in the number of hate groups in our country by about 14%. And of course, so much of this is amplified by the rhetoric in the campaign this year, particularly the rhetoric coming out of Mr. Trump's campaign.
Richard Cohen, we want to thank you for being with us, president of the Southern Poverty Law Center, speaking to us from Montgomery, Alabama. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. We'll be back in a minute. Oh, My Lord by Steve Mason here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We turn now to the presidential race. On Thursday night, Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders addressed supporters in a live webcast, vowing the continuation of what he called his political revolution. The speech came 2 days after Hillary Clinton won the last primary in Washington, D.C. While Clinton has claimed victory in the Democratic race, Sanders announced he would stay in until next month's convention. He did not endorse the former Secretary of State, but vowed to work with her to defeat the presumptive Republican nominee, Donald Trump.
The major political task that together we face in the next 5 months is to make certain that Donald Trump is defeated, and defeated badly. And I personally intend to begin my role in that process in a very short period of time. But defeating Donald Trump cannot be our only goal. We must continue our grassroots effort to create the America that we know we can become. And we must take that energy into the Democratic National Convention on July 25th in Philadelphia, where we will have more than 1,900 delegates.
Bernie Sanders went on to say he plans to push the Clinton campaign and the Democratic Party to adopt a more progressive agenda.
I look forward in the coming weeks to continued discussion between the two campaigns to make certain that your voices are heard and that the Democratic Party passes the most progressive platform in its history, and that Democrats actually fight for that agenda. I also look forward to working with Secretary Clinton to transform the Democratic Party so that it becomes a party of working people and young people and not just wealthy campaign contributors. A party that has the guts to take on Wall Street, the pharmaceutical industry, the fossil fuel industry, and the other powerful special interests that dominate so much of our political and economic life.
To talk more about the Sanders campaign, we're joined by Roseanne DeMauro, Executive Director of National Nurses United, the nation's largest organization of nurses, the first national union to back Senator Sanders last year for president. Sanders recently attempted to place DeMauro on the Democratic Platform Committee, but according to Sanders, the move was blocked by the Democratic National Committee. This weekend, National Nurses United is helping organize a major conference in Chicago called the People's Summit. Roseanne DeMauro will be speaking there, but is speaking here first. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Roseanne. Why don't you start off by responding to Bernie Sanders' announcement last night that he's staying in the race into the convention and what he wants to see happen, and then what you want to see happen.
Thank you. I listened to the announcement in a room with 1,400 registered nurses, and I have to say it was music to everyone's ears. Prior to Bernie speaking on the teleprompter, we played his commercial, America, and it just so much symbolized that beautiful commercial that he did with Simon Garfunkel's song. And everyone it just fell silent. And then when Bernie spoke, there was a massive relief in the room that there was an advocate that would be fighting for them, for the nurses, for their patients. The passion was palpable, and it was beautiful. And I think that's probably how it resonated with people across the country. What we know about Bernie is that he will be there. He's always been there as a fighter in the Senate, but that he'll continue to be there for us. But most importantly, his message was, we have to be there, we have to build a movement, we have to fight. Now, following, I just have to say this, but because it was just so sweet. Following his presentation, the nurses, because they always dance, we ascribe to Emma Goldman's philosophy: if we can't dance, we don't want to have the revolution. So they started up karaoke. They chose their songs. The Veterans Administration nurses who were in the room chose My Guy. And they got up and they sang it for Bernie. And it was just, it made everybody tear up. And then the next group did a song for Bernie called Don't Stop Believing by Journey. So that actually, I think, is emblematic of where things stand.
Roseanne DeMauro, I wanted to ask you about this issue of the DNC nixing you for being on the platform committee, and also the reasons that they felt that they didn't want labor union representation, the ostensible reasons, what that signifies.
You know, Juan, I think exactly ostensible. The fact that the DNC could use not having a labor leader on the platform committee as a reason says everything that you need to know about how far the Democratic Party has drifted from the working people of America. But actually, the real reason is that I fight. We are one of the only organizations, I'd say, that has systematically fought in its history for a single-payer health care system, because the nurses see the human suffering of people, and it's not negotiable. And that's the thing. We've seen with the neoliberal agenda and the austerity programs, we're all supposed to get on board and just, accept cuts. Well, when it comes to health, the nurses see the consequences of that. They see the fallout. They see people who can't afford their prescriptions. They see people who get to the hospital so late and their lives are compromised because of it. And so when it comes to single-payer, we don't compromise. We are going to fight. Every other country can achieve a single-payer system. People shouldn't suffer, and that's basically the bottom line. And one of the reasons that the nurses are so heartfelt in the Sanders campaign and remain so. And so excluding me I was not surprised whatsoever. It was ironic because, they chose Cornel West, who we like very, very much, but they excluded me. And what that says is, to me, is the role of finance and healthcare and what they don't want to see on the platform. There isn't a commitment to taking care of America's people by the Democratic Party any longer. A single-payer healthcare system is more cost-effective, it's the most efficient, and it guarantees access for everyone. And that's off the agenda. That's what that says.
Would you like to see Bernie Sanders run as a third-party candidate?
There is a massive amount of discussion about that. I don't think Bernie's going to consider that. We're having a People's Summit this weekend in Chicago, and by the way, we will be live streaming it, and it's still open, so folks in Chicago, feel free to come and join us. There'll be approximately 3,000 people so far registered for that. And it's grassroots activists, and it's people who've been doing movement building for many, many years. Juan's there tonight. with us. It's, you know, we have performers, we have really new films out, progressive films, but most importantly, why we're there is to network. And I'm sure that there'll be a variety of discussions from, you know, supporting Clinton and just basically conceding the fact that we're not going to achieve anything at this round in the electoral process at that level. And, you know, I'm sure people will talk about building third parties. There'll be a variety of discussions, so everyone's voice is going to be welcome here because it's a time for debate and it's a time for deep considerations. We saw the manipulation in the DNC of this election. We saw the horrendous campaign obstacles that we had to confront. It was a real eye-opener for the nurses in particular because they were across the country on the Sanders campaign, and they were at first quite stunned by the level of corruption, but eventually understood that you have to change things at a systemic level. So when Senator Sanders says that we have to transform the Democratic Party, we all kind of turn and look at each other and wonder, with Wall Street's money so invested in that party, is that possible any longer? So it just raises all the questions. The nurses had a really good discussion at their executive board yesterday, and we're staying to fight. We're staying with Bernie. We're going to fight for our issues through the convention, and we're going to continue to fight for our issues. What I'm the most worried about is the disaffection by Sanders not achieving the nomination. But that's still open. I mean, that's still an open question. I know there's a presumptive nominee, but that's still an open question. A lot can happen between here and the end of July. Regardless of that, Sanders' campaign is about changing America. And it's changing America from being a market to a society. And I think at a visceral level, that's what people really see and they want. They want their country back. And that's what our campaign's been about.
And Roseanne, your organization obviously was very pivotal in organizing support for Bernie Sanders. But among the other things that he said last night in terms of not just transforming the Democratic Party, but he said that it was an immediate political task of the next 5 months to make sure Donald Trump does not become president. Do you agree with that aspect of what he said?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we're really not very interested in having some neo-fascism in our country. And that's where this goes. My assumption is that Donald Trump will defeat himself, that the Republicans will wake up. I think, though, Juan, there's something deeper and that can't be ignored. And that is, and the people who support Trump give voice to that. And that's the deep frustration of where our country is going. And it seems to be continuing on that path by our electoral choices here and the presumptive nominees. Regardless of which side they were on, people want change. I think we'll all be unified in fighting Donald Trump. I also believe that many of the Clinton supporters basically just fell lockstep into the normal Democratic Party nomination process. But I believe on the issues, they'll be with us. They'll be with Bernie. They want a better America. They want education for their children. They want health care for their families. They want a society that doesn't pollute the air. They want immigrant rights. I mean, all of the things that this campaign is about, we continue on. And in fact, I think, tonight and tomorrow and the next day at the People's Summit, we'll be talking a lot about that. There's a lot of surrogates from the Sanders campaign who will be here, Nina Turner, Tulsi Gabbard. There's really incredible speakers on the environment, Naomi Klein tonight with you, Juan. And there's, the young generation of talent in the film industry and in the rock scene, actually, will be here. So we've got all of this young, incredible talent. I guess the thing that I've been an activist all my life, and what I'm the most happy about in this campaign is how intelligent the young people are. And look at this, and this cross-section of actors and actresses here tonight, for example, who are going to be doing readings, Rosario Dawson, for example, who's on the panel tonight with us as well. They're just they're so smart, and they've got a long future ahead, and they want this country to be returned to the people. And so I'm just feeling so good about the moment. I mean, obviously we would have loved to see Bernie and we still do. We'd love to see Bernie as the leader of this country. He deserves that role. He fights for us.
Roseanne DeMuro, we want to thank you for being with us, Executive Director of the National Nurses United and the California Nurses Association National Nurses Organizing Committee. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. The War and Peace Report, of course, will cover the summit that's happening this weekend, the People's Conference that you're holding in Chicago, and we'll be covering it on Monday. But right now, we're turning to another issue. Juan?
Well, there's been a major break in the decade-long fight to unveil records related to the New York City Police Department's surveillance of political organizations in the 1960s and 1970s. In recent years, the NYPD has come under fire for spying on Muslim communities and the Occupy Wall Street movement. But decades ago, the NYPD also spied extensively on political organizations, including the Young Lords, a radical group founded by Puerto Ricans modeled on the Black Panther Party. The Young Lords staged our first action in July of 1969 in an effort to force the city of New York to increase garbage pickups in East Harlem. They would go on to inspire activists around the country as we occupied churches and hospitals in an attempt to open the spaces to community projects.
Among the leaders of the Young Lords, as you heard one going from they to we, was Juan Gonzalez himself, a Democracy Now! Co-host. Well, a professor here at Baruch College in New York City has fought for a decade to obtain records related to the New York Police Department's surveillance of the Young Lords. Last month, a judge dismissed a lawsuit filed by Professor Johanna Fernandez after New York claimed it had lost the records. Questioned by a New York One reporter, Lawrence Byrne, the NYPD's Deputy Commissioner for Legal Matters, said the records seemed to have disappeared.
It's not at all unusual or nefarious that physical documents, old folders from the 1970s, have disappeared. But this goes back 45 years. It's unfortunate. We'll continue to search for it, but we haven't been able to locate it.
But this week, Johanna Fernandez received word from the city that the records had not been lost or destroyed. In fact, the city's municipal archive had found more than 520 boxes, about 1.1 million pages, apparently containing the complete remaining records documenting the NYPD's surveillance of political groups in New York City throughout the 1960s and the 1970s.
To talk more about this revelation, we're joined by Johanna Fernandez herself, history professor at Baruch College here in New York. She filed the lawsuit in 2014 to force the city of New York to locate and make public records on police surveillance of the Young Lords. Her forthcoming book is on the Young Lords is called When the World Was Their Stage, and we're joined by her attorney, Gideon Oliver. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! So, Johanna, talk about how this all happened.
Well, I began this search a decade ago. And the police department in New York City gave me the runaround. And I personally believe that they were duplicitous. About 3 years ago, I went in person to One Police Plaza thinking that perhaps I could rationally talk to somebody. And they suggested that they were going to help me find the records, and they called me professor and doctor. And then they sent me a letter, like about 6 months later, telling me that they were going to dismiss my request, my FOIL request. And it was then that I pulled resources together and hired Gideon Oliver, in part because I understood the historical significance of these records, not just for the Young Lords, but for the history of New York City and the history of activism, and the ways in which the police have systematically undermined and essentially destroyed radical organizations such as the Young Lords.
And Johanna, how does somebody lose and then suddenly find 500 boxes? I mean, where were these boxes? Where were they supposed to be, and how did they suddenly come up with them?
Well, in 1971, radical lawyers in New York filed a suit demanding that these files of police surveillance be preserved. And in 1986, a judge said that they could not be discarded, that they had to be preserved for the historical record. And the judge at that point said that the police had to work with the Municipal Archive of the City of New York to preserve these records. And from 1986 to the present, they've been lost, over 1 million records. But they were found. One day they were lost, and now they were found. Now they are found, thankfully, in what is known as the Queen's Warehouse, which houses currently not just the hand shoe boxes. Again, an epic find.
And hand shoe is the original case that you were referring to.
The hand shoe is the original case I was referring to. Which is an epic win for civil liberties and for historians seeking to understand the history of the city. But this warehouse apparently houses over 10,000 boxes of records of the city of New York that have not been inventoried. So that's exactly where they were found.
I want to turn to some of the New York City police index cards documenting surveillance of the young lords, including a number of these index cards on you, Juan. One dated April 4th, 1969, describes Juan's height and weight, 5'11", 150 pounds, and reads,
I wish
quote,
I was that way down.
the above person, this is what it says, the above person was observed at a rally held at 110th Street and Broadway, sponsored by the West Side Community Council against urban renewal and Columbia expansion. He did not speak, unquote. Another dated January 18th, 1970 reads, quote, the above-named person was present at the First Spanish Methodist Church on 111th Street and Lexington Avenue, Manhattan. He, along with a group of young lords and other sympathizers, were at the church to feed the community children and give them clothes, unquote. There are detailed notes not only on Juan's participation in the protest, but also on his published articles and media appearances. Your response to this, Juan?
Well,
is it true, first of all? Did you not speak at 110th and Broadway?
I'm sure that there were many times when I did not speak, a surprise to many. But what I'm interested in is who was giving the reports, because we've always had debates among former young lords about who were the police undercovers, and of course, while I'm sure that these files would have those names redacted, we could pretty much be able to piece together by when the events occurred and who we recall being there as who would be the likely informants. But it is an amazing fact, because back then the group, we knew it as BOSS. Bureau of Special Services, or the Red Squad, that was the one that was in charge of collecting all of this information. And it was a very extensive organization with lots of informants that were providing reports.
Well, Juan, I want to play a clip of you from the Third World newsreel film, El Pueblo se levanta, The People Are Rising.
The main thing that we're clear on is that it's such a simple thing to give us space. And now that we've gotten into this church and eaten here and been here for hours, we know what a big place it is. It's incredible, the space in this church. All unused, never open to the community. And it's just incredible to us how such a simple thing like granting a space has resulted in so many heads being busted and so much trouble in East Harlem. And our only understanding of that has to be that religion, organized religion has so enslaved our people, has so destroyed their minds to thinking about salvation in the hereafter, they refuse to deal with the conditions that they have now and with the oppression that they have now. The people who come to this church are mostly Puerto Ricans who have already raised themselves to a certain standard. Many of them have left the community. They no longer relate to the community except to drive in on Sundays and go to services. And it's amazing to us how people can talk about, Jesus, who walked among the poor, the poorest and most oppressed, the prostitutes, the drug addicts of his time, that these people can claim to be Christians, right? And they've forgotten that it was Jesus who said that it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And they forget that it was Jesus who said the last shall be first and the first shall be last. And they forget that it was Jesus who said, feed the hungry and clothe the poor. And this is what we're after. We're after following the tenets and the spirit of Christianity, not the letter of Christianity, of those Bibles that have perverted Jesus' real revolutionary and social consciousness.
And that was Juan Gonzalez. Thanks to the Third World Newsreel for that clip. And for our listeners, if you want to see a young Juan Gonzalez, go to our website at democracynow.org. The significance, Gideon Oliver, of these documents that have been found in Queens.
can't be understated. I mean, this is the entire trove of records of the NYPD's political surveillance operations between 1955 and 1972. So we're talking about not just records of surveillance of the Young Lords and Juan, but also of surveillance of the Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam, anti-war movement in New York City. And it was a part of the benefit of the bargain of the settlement in the Handshoe litigation that these documents would be preserved, or if they were to be destroyed, they would only be destroyed after a process, a sign-off process that the law department and the municipal archive would have to participate in. So the fact that these documents not only have now been discovered, but can be made available to the public is just extraordinary.
Well, but now there's going to have to be some kind of a cataloging process, right? I mean, because you're talking about documents that have not even been properly organized. Are you marshaling a group of folks to do that, or what? How's this going to work?
That's not my end.
So I think it's important to say that the Municipal Archive of the City of New York is committed to making this available to the public and to working with scholars. And they've invited me early on to look through the records and to help identify the most important records for my project, but also to help in the process of inventorying this really epic trove of documents, which will help historians understand the hard hat demonstrations, for example. There is a whole
famous
section.
Whitehall demonstrations.
Exactly.
Yes.
So there's a whole section on that. There's an entire section of boxes on the Columbia strike of 1968, but also activities at Columbia in 1972. The Black Panther Party is identified by name, and it's one of the only organizations that is identified fully by name, along with the NOI. Right. I imagine that there is information here about the murder of Malcolm X. And so these records are really going to transform our understanding and critique of the parameters of allowable conduct on the part of the police. And we know that there has been a lot of debate and discussion about what the police can and cannot do in American society today in the aftermath of 9/11. But the historical record really allows us to step back and ask questions about civil constitutional rights.
You're talking about local surveillance. What about federal surveillance, like COINTELPRO? Not that they didn't also work with the local police, but the counterintelligence program of the FBI.
So there was an enormous amount of surveillance on the part of the FBI, the COINTELPRO project of the FBI, which, as we know, was responsible in working with the Chicago police in the assassination of Fred Hampton in Chicago in 1969, right around the time that the Young Lords were, in fact, about to occupy the First Spanish Methodist Church. What I found in my research, because I requested the COINTELPRO documents pretty early on at the same time that I requested the police documents, is that the police documents are a lot more methodical and a lot more specific. And it makes sense because the police is close to local communities. And this is not just about New York, but it was police departments across the nation that were engaged in disrupting and surveilling violently, in many instances, the work of activists. And those records are more revelatory, I believe, from my study of collections of both than the COINTELPRO documents.
Did Police One ever approach you and say afterwards, you know, maybe someone you became friendly with, that they were monitoring you and following you?
Oh yeah, well there were former police men who afterwards, you know, clearly said to me, yeah, we were involved in following you, and also, for instance, in 1972, I was arrested by 13 FBI agents and the police on selective service violation, but they not only they not only busted into our headquarters on 142nd and Willis Avenue in the Bronx, they broke down the doors, they ransacked the entire office and took all of our records. And then when we went to court to say, hey, we want our records back, they denied that they ever had them. And so I'd be interested to see if there are reports in there about what they found when they ransacked our offices and then swore before a judge that they didn't take anything. So it would be interesting to see that.
And whether they kept them.
Right. Well, I'm sure they did.
They
definitely kept what they found because we never got it back. But.
And Juan, your thoughts today on all of these documents? I mean, a number of these documents involve you.
Well,
being
released. it's what I think it's great that they've been found, and as you said, it's going to be a treasure trove for the historians and to go back and recreate the history. The problem with these abuses is that it always takes decades to uncover them. And in the meanwhile, the damage has been done to the activists and the dissidents that were involved in these movements. And it's almost as if the society never learns, that the abuses just keep on being repeated a generation or two generations later. And there's so that's the big problem that I have with the continuing government abuse of the way that they look at dissidents.
And finally, Gideon Oliver, we do have to wrap up, but this whole issue of Hanshu, what this agreement was, you just have a minute, and whether we know whether this surveillance is continuing.
Well, certainly political surveillance by the NYPD is alive and well in New York City, and in the Hanshu context, Judge Haidt is still on the case. He's been on the case for many years, and he is in the process of considering whether the proposed settlement in the Muslim spying cases should be adopted by the court. And I think that debates like that have been really shortchanged for the lack of these documents. And in the future, hopefully the availability of these documents will enrich those debates.
We want to thank you both for being with us. Gideon Oliver, attorney Johanna Fernandez, for your persistence in getting these documents and ultimately 1 million of these documents being found. Johanna Fernandez is professor of history at Baruch College. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. When we come back, stay with us. Oblivion by Grimes here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Shocking new details have been revealed in public about the CIA's torture program as the agency has declassified dozens of once secret documents. A portion of the new documents deal with a prisoner named Gul Rahman, who froze to death at a secret CIA prison in 2002. Rahman's family is now suing CIA contracted psychologists James Mitchell and John Bruce Jessen, who helped design the U.S. torture program. The new records also show a prisoner who was waterboarded 83 times was likely willing to cooperate with interrogators before the torture. The account from medical personnel who helped with the first waterboarding of Abu Zubaydah deals a major blow to the CIA's insistence it gain crucial information through torture. Zubaydah said he made up fake terrorist plots in order to stop the abuse.
Another partially declassified document reveals President Bush was uneasy uneasy about what the agency was doing. One 2006 memo read, quote, "The president was concerned about the image of a detainee chained to the ceiling, clothed in a diaper, and forced to go to the bathroom on themselves." Joining us now is Dror Ledeen, attorney with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, who helped win the release of these documents. Dror, welcome to Democracy Now! What did you find?
I mean, we found so much more evidence of what everyone already knows, which is that the CIA torture program was not at all some scientific method of getting information from bad people who would only give it up under torture. But instead, it was an exercise in brutality against people who the CIA didn't know whether they had information, whether they didn't have information, and where the only answer was more torture whenever they didn't get the answers they wanted. The result, we learn, is not only the brutality against individuals, but also actual damage to the country's ability to gather intelligence. So these documents are the CIA's own account of their failures.
And the role of psychologists in this? What do the documents show?
I mean, the role of psychologists is horrifying. So we represent also in another lawsuit Gul Rahman's family over his death under torture. And these documents now reveal why he was singled out for such brutality. And it's because of this psychological theory that they could identify someone who was a sophisticated resistor and then deploy this escalating set of tortures in order to break him. And when you now have these reports, we can see why they thought he was such a sophisticated resistor. And this is what it is. He complained about the violations of his human rights. He complained about the poor treatment. And in a detention facility in which he would freeze to death from hypothermia, he said he had trouble thinking because it was so cold. They write this down in cables and say, Gul Rahman is a very sophisticated resistor. We need to employ even more brutality. A different part of the documents describes how senior people at the agency believed that waterboarding was, quote, a silver bullet, and they would rapidly escalate to it. So the whole torture program, when it finally became public, was sold by the CIA as if it was very carefully calibrated. They would only do what they needed to get people to cooperate. But the reality was nothing like that. They would just immediately go to the worst possible thing they could do. And people like Gul Rahman paid the price.
Talk about Abu Zubaydah, the waterboarding 83 times, and about the fact that they said he would talk before the torture.
Yeah, the remarkable thing is that a lot of people think that the CIA program, you know, they would only go to torture, again, when they knew that someone was holding information, it's a ticking time bomb, whatever. But the thing is, they don't actually know that going into it. And so with Abu Zubaydah, they didn't even know who he was. They were convinced he was the number 3 person in al-Qaeda. And in these some of the new transcripts we have are the testimony that he gave at Guantanamo, in which he says, even the CIA tells him, oh, we made a big mistake with you. But that big mistake, you know, the way the CIA operated is that you had the people on the ground doing the torture, and then you had these analysts back at headquarters who would say, oh, he hasn't told you about the plot? Well, he definitely knows about a plot, so you should torture him further. And one of the remarkable things about the cables that we just uncovered is you see actually the torturers talking to the headquarters and saying, we don't know. I mean, we've been torturing him for a while now, and it really doesn't seem like there's much left to say. And they say, oh, we can't believe that there's nothing more. Torture further.
And the information about the pangs of conscience of President Bush?
You know, it's hard to credit that, but on the other hand, I think a lot of people think of torture in a more abstract way rather than thinking of a detainee chained to the ceiling in a diaper. And so I think that, you know, the president or anyone else, when ultimately confronted with the brutality of it, has to really think again, you know, is this who we are? Is this, even imagining that it was, you know, effective, which we know it wasn't, is this who we are?
Do you now have evidence for lawsuits for crimes, charges of war crimes to be brought up against U.S. officials right on up to the president for what they knew and when they knew it?
I mean, that's the thing that is horrifying about this, is that these are war crimes. This is evidence of war crimes, and yet no one's been prosecuted. No senior official has ever been prosecuted. The ACLU can't prosecute people. We have a damages lawsuit on behalf of the victims. But the Department of Justice, you know, needs to prosecute people. Human Rights Watch just called, you know, renewed its call for prosecutions based on these new documents. It's something we've long said, but the government has to actually want to do it, and that's a problem.
Very quickly, how did you get these documents, and are there more?
We got these documents through a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit. Some of them we've been fighting over for over a decade. And yes, there will be more. There's there's so much more left to know about this program, and it's essential that we know about it now.
Dror Ladin, we want to thank you for being with us, staff attorney at the ACLU National Security Project Counsel in the FOIA case that led to the release of the CIA documents, as well as in the ACLU suit against Mitchell and Jessen, the two psychologists who designed the CIA torture program. That does it for our show. Democracy Now! Has 3 job openings: an office coordinator, news producer, and a senior video news producer. Go to our website at democracynow.org and apply immediately. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Dina Guzder, Amy Littlefield, Sam Alcoff, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Sharina Nadura, Juan Carlos Davila, Pedro Rodriguez, Mike DeFilippo, and Miguel Noguera are engineers. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby, Hugh Gran, David Prude, R.L. Boone, Vesta Godars. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez for another edition of Democracy Now! Check our website at democracynow.org for transcripts, video, and audio podcasts. Thanks so much.